Are we sure we want to air this? I'm not really...
You're feeling very uncomfortable right now.
A little bit, yeah.
Welcome to Robot Unicorn, hosted by my parents, Jess and Scott. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
Hey friends, just a gentle reminder before we hop into this episode that today we are talking about body safety, we were talking about abuse, and we were talking about a lot of topics that may be triggering and definitely not for little ears to hear. So just a reminder to make sure that you listen to this podcast with your earphones in or when your children aren't around. And if any of the topics are just feeling too heavy or triggering, please know it's okay to turn off the episode, to come back to it later, or to skip past parts. Before we get into the episode today, Scott and I just wanted to do a little introduction to this topic that we're going to cover. We just actually finished recording the first 2 episodes of this series, and we're sitting together just kind of reflecting on what you're about to hear, and it's pretty heavy. And even as we were talking, so we're going to talk about why do people abuse children, who becomes the abusers, and how do they get away with it? Those are kind of like the big questions that we're asking in this series. And it was inspired by just seeing so much on the media recently about different people coming out who are abusers or who are in positions of power and they're hurting children. And
we saw many in our local area in Ontario, Canada.
Yeah, specifically in our local area in Ontario, Canada. It was really blowing me away and made me want to have this conversation with Scott. But Scott, I think maybe you should share kind of how you're feeling right now before we get into it, just so people are kind of prepared.
Well, I will say we want to give a trigger warning for this conversation. I feel like this conversation was a little bit more challenging for me than I was anticipating going into it, just based on my past experience, not with sexual abuse in particular, but abuse. And I feel as though it was maybe a little bit more difficult for me to have this conversation than I expected.
We recorded a different intro prior to recording the whole episode, but I think what we weren't prepared for is that because Scott was abused as a child, even though today we're talking about sexual abuse, a lot of the things that we're talking about today would bring up old feelings.
Yeah, well, and they're kind of related in a lot of ways, right? So
yeah, and so we just want to let you know that that might happen for you too if you have been through abuse and or this is a big fear of yours. And so just to be mindful, and if you need to turn it off, that's totally fine. If you want to come back to it at a different time when you're ready for a heavy discussion, I think that's okay too. I said in the episodes that it's really important to me to have these hard conversations because that is how we can get knowledge out there, how we can stop these people from hurting children. And that's so incredibly important to me. It always has been. I'll never stop advocating for children and body safety. And it's probably the heaviest conversation that we've had so far.
Yeah.
We just want to be really transparent that it's a heavy one and not to listen to it with your kids around.
And I just want to note, the whole point of this is that, the first couple, it might sound all doom and gloom, but the final part of this series, we are also explaining how do we protect our children. So it's not just all doom and gloom. We don't want to just leave you feeling that way. There's hope.
So don't worry, we will come back with more tools and tips to help, but we care about you, we care about your kids, and we really hope that this series helps you. Specifically, we wanted to talk about one aspect of sexual abuse. I mean, we'll cover lots of different things in this episode, but we did want to talk about, for this first part, why people in power become abusers. Why does that even happen? And how do people actually get to the point where they can abuse a child? I feel like that's a question that I was really wrestling with a lot and something I think about a lot because specifically we see it a lot in people who are in positions of power. And how do they get to that point where this happens, right? And I think that's an important discussion that we haven't had we've had these discussions off air, but I'm excited to even just chat and get your opinion and your thoughts on this on air. I think it's a really important topic.
You did more of the research and reading through that than I did. Did you find anything on if it more often happens from people in power or just people who have access to...
I think we'll get to this in the episode, but there always is some element of power, right?
Is there not just an inherent power balance between an adult and a child?
Exactly. That's what I mean. when there is a adult-child sexual abuse relationship, there is just that power imbalance.
Yeah.
But I wanted to do this discussion specifically because I kept reading news article after news article.
Yeah.
I guess let's start there. We were in the hospital, like we mentioned a few episodes ago, with our daughter. And the one night, someone had sent me this article saying, hey, Jess, did you see this principal in this town that's close to us was just charged with multiple counts of sexual abuse against students? So, of course, I look into it and I type the town's name and someone shows up, but it was a different person than this other person said. So I start looking through it and I see that in our local area, just like Southern Ontario, I think there was like 5 different either principals or vice principals that were charged with some sort of allegations of sexual abuse against their students or other children or other youth or grooming. And this isn't the first time, obviously, that I've been faced with this question of why are these people who are in positions of power able to groom these students, able to sexually abuse them? How do they get away with it? How does it go on for so long? I remember even, this is a few years back, but there was a pastor of this very popular church, and he was also convicted of these different crimes to do with sexual abuse. There was a pastor from Hillsong who was recently also charged. There's everything to do with the Jeffrey Epstein case, which is like all these people.
Yeah, right.
It's just seems like there's this constant stream of people in power, and then you find out that actually they've got all this unethical stuff going on behind the scenes. I think, at the same time that I was reading all those articles about the vice principals, all the Jeffrey Epstein files were like starting to come out, right? And then you see other people that people looked up to who are in those files, like even just sometimes the comments that they're making about women or children, and just like, it just makes you think, like, how do you get to that point and how do you get away with it for so long?
Can you define grooming for me?
Yeah. So grooming is basically the process in which someone is trying to eventually facilitate some sexual contact. And we'll talk about it in terms of like an adult-child relationship.
That's all it's for? Is just for...
So it could be like we're grooming for, let's say, sexual contact. We're grooming because we want to traffic. Grooming and trafficking is also a very common thing. But we have some...
because I think our area here, our region that we live in, of the province is, I think, twice the national average in Canada of trafficking issues and events.
Yeah, and we are very close to the border.
Right.
Which is a big part of why. But where we live, I have trafficking on the mind a lot because we have to be careful, right? And you have to be aware and know what the signs could be and know what grooming is, because you don't want your child or other children that I work with to be groomed, to be trafficked, right? So grooming is the process in which you're developing trust, you're developing a relationship, but there is this ulterior motive that either we're going to eventually, this is going to lead to sexual contact, this is going to lead to trafficking, this is going to lead to something else. But first, we're going to develop this relationship with this child and make them trust us. And that could go for child, youth, or even like an adult who's being groomed. So what we need to know about grooming is, in most cases, because what we know is in most cases of sexual abuse specifically, it's done by someone the person already knows and trusts.
Yeah, so I saw you wrote that down. Mm-hmm. That, for whatever reason, feels so hard to believe that is the case. Because I think we talk about this later in our notes here, but that is a very high percentage. Mm-hmm. Completely different from the whole stranger danger thing, which I know we've talked about in that previous episode. I don't know. That part for me is like, it's so counter to what, let's say, we grew up with. Mm-hmm. The idea of it being stranger danger. Yeah. Where a stranger's going to come up to you in a van and say, hey, do you want some candy? And come out and lure you into their van and all of a sudden kidnap you and take you away. I feel like that was the 80s and 90s.
That's what we believed, right?
We were always told was going to happen. That concept to me, and I have no doubt, because the research, there's a bunch of articles that we found on this, or that you found on this. I have no doubt it's true, but it just seems so counter to what we were taught growing up.
Yeah, and what most people believe, right? Yeah,
and still, because that's how we were taught growing up, and unless you're provided with evidence otherwise, why would you change your mind on that? I thought that was such an interesting, I don't know. It's still, even though we had that conversation, let's say last year on this podcast, it's still, to me, it feels like it's a stranger thing rather than someone you know.
Yeah. Whereas the truth is, in at least 90% of cases, the abuser is someone who's already known to the child. And the reason that that works for an abuser is because they can develop the relationship. They can go through this grooming process, which we're going to talk about, so that they can get close enough to a child to be able to abuse them. Right? Whereas if you think about a stranger, there has to just be like this perfect situation in which they can abuse a child and leave them. But that's very unlikely because in order to abuse a child, you have to be left alone with them for a period of time, right? It's unlikely that a stranger is going to be left alone with your child unless they are the man in the candy van who's like coming to try and kidnap them, right? If you think critically about it, it makes a lot of sense, but it's not what we were taught. So then what happens, and what has happened, I think, in previous generations, is we're thinking, oh, well, my child's with someone I know, and if I know them, therefore I trust them, therefore they're safe. And so we maybe don't have our guards up as much around these people, or not, really considering, are they a safe person? Is there any red flags? Should I trust my child? Should they be alone with them? Does my child know things to tell me? So it can set a child up to be in an unsafe situation, and we don't even realize it as parents.
How do I, as a parent, know our girls are going to someone's house, they're safe there or not, right? Like, is it the kids that are supposed to be telling us, or should we as parents be seeing certain signs? Like, I don't feel comfortable with how they are. They're a little bit too friendly or something. I don't know. Like, we have a lot of friendly people in our lives.
I know.
So how do you then determine certain behaviors are not acceptable versus others are?
Yeah. I mean, when I was originally doing this research, I had that question, whether I wrote it in here or not. It was like in the notes, like, how do we trust someone? And we've had this discussion. We've had full episodes just on trust and being skeptical and all of those kind of things, because that really is a question. Like, how do you eventually trust someone with your child?
And I think for me,
it
would be easy to just
no play dates ever. No.
Yeah. Which maybe is not the most fair. And it's kind of the helicopter way of dealing with it too.
I think we need to have both pieces. So let's say you have one of our children who's like almost 4, right? She's not really going to understand all the body safety things. She's not really going to know to tell us, oh, someone told you to keep a secret, like come and tell us. Like she might be starting to gather a little bit of that from the conversations we've been having. But I wouldn't necessarily go send our 4-year-old to a play date to someone's house who I totally don't know, or I just even know a little bit, but I don't know their siblings. I don't know who else is going to be there, right? But I might send her to, let's say, my parents' house, who I grew up with and I know very well, and I know they're safe because I have that history with them. Whereas our older child, I'd still be very mindful in terms of where I send her for a play date. I'd want to know the parents and I'd want to know where she's going and make sure that we feel comfortable with it. But I also know that she really understands this body safety information that we've been teaching her. So she would be able to understand and identify if there's something unsafe going on because we've had these conversations with her. So I might be a little less, quote unquote, helicoptery and be like, okay, you can go to this person's birthday party, but just a reminder, here's the things you can always call. But it's difficult, and I'm sure you're going to have some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, my issue with that is, let's say those newspaper articles that we saw on all these principals and vice principals and other people who have been charged with this or convicted of these crimes. It seems so often that you look at the articles and they talk about family and friends saying, we had no idea. Like, we would never have expected this from this person. So are they just super naive that they didn't know this was happening and maybe they should have caught? I don't know. It feels to me as though it's almost impossible to tell as a parent if someone is or is not safe.
Yeah, I think that is possibly very true, right? And especially like, let's say these principals, vice principals situation, everybody's sending their kids to the school, trusting them, right? And so that is, again, where it's the balance between we do the best we can, but we also have to equip our children.
Yeah, maybe those are the majority of the articles we looked at. But what if it's a family friend or an uncle or, I don't know, some random person that is like close family or friend of yours that does this kind of thing to your own child? I would say, okay, speaking from experience of receiving abuse, not sexual abuse, but receiving abuse, even now I would say people still don't believe me when I say I had all of these things happen to me. Because it's so hard to comprehend that someone they know could do such terrible things to a child.
Yeah.
Right? So I feel like people aren't really looking for it, or they're looking too much and they're like, well, my child's not going to see anyone. I don't trust any of my family. I don't trust any of our friends. I'm never going to let them. So I don't know. I still find this topic to be a little bit difficult to truly understand how to deal with it, other than teach our kids body safety. Of course, we have to do that, educate ourselves on the process so we can notice the patterns of the people in power who become abusers. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer or question here. I just feel like it's a complicated thing because, especially from my own experience being abused by a family member and no one believes you, or very few people believe you, especially at first. I feel like it's different now, but I don't know. That's a challenging.
Hey friends, so at pickup last week, our daughter asked Scott a truly kind of tricky question in front of her younger siblings. Scott was telling me that when he heard a question like this, he used to panic, but this time he had a plan. And he said to our daughter, "Thank you for asking. Let's talk tonight when we've got privacy." And that's a line that he learned straight from our new body safety and consent course at Nurtured First. So this new body safety and consent course is taught by me. So Jess, if you listen to this podcast, you know me. I'm a child therapist and a mom of 3, and I have taught body safety and consent education for years. This course takes all my years of experience teaching this education and gives you calm, age-appropriate language for body parts, consent, and boundaries. You'll learn how to teach your kids that no means no. You'll learn how to teach them to read facial cues. You'll talk about safe and unsafe touch, and you'll even teach them about their uh-oh feeling. There's guidance inside this course for the real life stuff, like tickling that goes too far, and even the difference between a secret and a surprise. We made this course at Nurtured First because research shows that body safety education helps kids speak up sooner, and we want that for our family, for Scott and I, but also for you. So check the course out at nurturedfirst.com/bodysafety, and to save 10%, use the code ROBOTUNICORN. And just full disclosure here, we are the creators of this course, and we're so proud of it. I feel like this topic brings up a lot for you in regards to that, right? Because A, you've been abused. B, you haven't been believed.
Yeah.
Right? Which actually is
by
often
people who are close friends and family of the abuser.
Yes.
Right.
And C, your abuser was very manipulative and able to switch the story so that not only was this person not at fault, but often it was actually you who was to blame. Yeah. Right? So I think this obviously brings up a lot for you, and talking in terms of like the broader context of abuse, not just sexual abuse, it makes sense that you're like, but how do you trust? Where do you go? You don't even have a question, right? And I think a lot of people listening probably feel the same way. Mm-hmm. Like it's not even necessarily a question. It's just like your child has to go out in the world. We can't keep them home all the time and never let them go on a play date or see their friends or whatever. But there has to be these things put in place, these guardrails, so that we can keep them safe, so we don't put them in a situation. And if they are, they know what to do, right? And I think you touched on a really important point, and I don't know if we were going to get there or not, but not being believed. A big part of your trauma, and the trauma for a lot of people that I work with who have been abused, whether sexually abused or abused in any way, is that they finally got the courage to say, this is what's been happening. And then people said, well, there's no way, right? Or they made those comments like, this person wouldn't do such a thing, or I can't even believe that. That doesn't make any sense. And when the person who's been abused finally is brave enough to say that, and then others dismiss it, or they say that doesn't make sense, or that can't be right, it tells them, because they're already so confused, right? Because abuse is very confusing. Mm-hmm. And abusers and people who groom, they are masters of confusion. That is how abuse can continue happening, right? It leads to more of that confusion, which can actually be the most traumatizing part of the whole experience. And it's very interesting research. And I don't know if I have like the specific stats in what I was researching for this episode, but it's very interesting research that if your child, let's say, has gone through a situation where they've been abused or even like sexually harassed or like any form of abuse, and they tell you, and you can process it with them and you believe them, it is much less likely that they will be traumatized long-term by what happened to them than if they go through the abuse and they don't talk about it and they don't tell you, or they're not believed. Right. So it's actually possible for your child to have gone through something really difficult. They tell you, you believe them, you work through it together, they know that they're safe, you make plans for it not to happen again, whatever, it's reported, all of these things. They can move forward in their life without that being a significant trauma. But if they tell you and you don't believe them, or you say, oh, that person would never do that, or you must have it wrong, and you like confuse them even further, that's where the big trauma, like capital T trauma, happens. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really important thing that even can give us hope for our children. And again, it's like why we equip them to be like, you can tell me anything and I'll believe you. Like, please come to me. You can always tell me the truth.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is so powerful for our children. And I think that's something that parents can feel hope with because like you said, we can't protect them from everything. Like we send them to school. We put them on the bus. Like we put our kids on the bus, right? Maybe they go to a play date, a birthday party, and we do our very, very best to protect them. But if something happens and they know they can talk to us, that is protective as well. So I think that's a good hope for parents.
Mm-hmm. I feel as though our girls are, like our oldest pretty much tells us everything. Mm-hmm. Our middle daughter, she's starting to do that more and more, which I think we've seen a cognitive leap that she's been going through recently. Like we've both been commenting on that.
Yeah, she's in that 5 to 7 shift right now, and so we're definitely seeing the growth in that shift. 100%. Yeah.
Is there a time where it's just not within a child's personality you could tell them all these things, but they still won't tell you? And maybe we're getting too far ahead too. I don't know. Like we can go back to...
I think we can go back, but like let's answer that question for a moment because there are certain children who are more vulnerable and I think it's important that we talk about that. So first, your child who's like under that 5 to 7 shift, right? I do think it's important that as parents, like we put as much protective factors in place as we can. So I wouldn't be sending my 4-year-old to someone, even though, their parents from her school and she loves this friend, and I wouldn't send her to their house on a play date without knowing the parents. Even though she loves the friend and they're good friends at school and the parents are most likely fine, I would be going to that play date, right? Mm-hmm. I think there's things that we can do just as protective factors for our youngest, most vulnerable children, because our 4-year-old's not going to have the skills to like yell, stop, or say, I need you to call my mom, come pick me up, or whatever it is, right? Whereas our 9-year-old, everyone knows that she's very well educated on body safety, and that actually reduces her risk. It's like even people knowing that you're educating your child, like be vocal about that, that reduces their risk to being a target of abuse, because abusers are much less likely to target a child who they know is going to tell their parents and has this education.
Right.
So even education and being like, I would talk about that in front of your family. Like, hey, we're talking about body safety. Like I would talk about that to everyone.
I mean, yeah, right. That's you. You will say that to anyone you meet.
I will say that to everyone and anyone.
Topics
it is one of my favorite topics. But that like the more people that know that you teach that to your child, the lower your child's risk is, because the abuser is much less likely to target them knowing that they're going to have those conversations with you, right? Mm-hmm. There's even interesting research that's been done on children who know the anatomically correct names. And this research was done, it was interviews with perpetrators of abuse who are like in prison. And one of the things that they said they were more likely to target was children who didn't know the proper names for their body parts and children who they knew had not talked to their parents about these things. So again, that's where education is prevention. It's really important. The other people who are very vulnerable to abuse are neurodivergent individuals. And this is actually what got me started in this field to begin with.
Yeah.
Because depending on what is going on for them, but I worked with a lot of adults with intellectual disabilities. They had never been given any type of sex ed class, any type of education in this, which is like mind-boggling to me.
They were literally... At least in our province, they're taken out of, or they were at that point at least, taken out of the classes where they talked about sex ed and whatever else, body safety.
Yeah, and the idea was like, oh, we don't want them to get any ideas of what they can do, as if they are not also, human and sexual beings and likely going to get themselves in these situations. They also are sometimes more likely to be the abusers. So if they don't have the tools, right? So sometimes neurodivergent individuals who don't know like what's appropriate behavior, what's inappropriate, who may have less of that impulse control, less ability to perceive other people's emotions, might be more likely in the position of doing something that's inappropriate without even recognizing that what they're doing is inappropriate. So this is different than, let's say, the principal vice principal situation, but I used to work with a lot of individuals who were the abusers. And a lot of times in that situation, when they had an intellectual disability, they just didn't know what they were doing was not okay. And so we had to do a lot of education to teach what is okay, what is not okay. So that's another situation in which abuse can happen. But our children who are neurodivergent, who may have a more difficult time remembering, the body safety rules that you're teaching them, who may be more trusting of others without noticing the red flags or the social cues. These are the kids that we also need to be more mindful of, like, how are we protecting them? Where are they going? What do they know? Do they know that they can talk to me about these things? So these are just helpful things for parents to know.
Okay.
Hey friends, thanks so much for sticking with Scott and I throughout this difficult but very important topic today. We are so glad to have you here and that you're open to having these conversations with us. We will be back next week with more on this topic, and we are going to get even deeper into why people become abusers, how do we get here, and how do we protect our children, most importantly. Can't wait to talk to you. We will see you next week. Hey friends, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. We are glad that you are here. If you enjoyed today's episode and found it interesting, we'd really appreciate it if you'd leave a rating and a review. Scott and I actually sit down together and read them all. A 5-star rating helps us share our podcast and get these important messages out there. Thank you so much for listening, and we can't wait to talk to you again next time.